Part of our summer culture is that we believe that we hear from God.
There's a step in which I learn that God talks to me. There's a whole nother step that says that God talks to you, and that I have the ability to accept that. And then, of course, John has the ability to speak it and share it. Welcome back to Tempus Divum. Today I'm out in front of the church here. This is the Friends Church in Newburgh. And we're going to talk about what the session is called All Things New. But in a big way, what this topic is about is heaven. It's about the afterlife. It's about what comes next. And especially what is the Christian response to death. This topic was actually on our schedule going back, 5-6 months. And it happened to come up just after we had a death in our organization. It was my best friend. It was John Berquist. He passed away in a sudden car accident, and this was coming up on the schedule, and it was hard to think about. Like that's the last thing I wanted to think about. That's probably the last thing anyone in our shop wanted to think about. And for that matter, like whoever wants to think about that stuff. And yet, I also think that it was providential that this came up the way we did. For one thing, we wound up with a session a while back about grieving, just about how do we do grieving well, and that was predicated largely on what we were seeing with regard to protests and Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, and there was all this stuff and coronavirus and quarantine. 2020 is such a hot mess that we find ourselves, we're all grieving something, even if it's just the loss of being able to go out with our friends. And yet here it was a perfect opportunity for us to learn how to do something well that was coming down our pipe, and we didn't obviously know it. That said, when we start talking about this topic on All Things New, what we start with is the realization that for all the sort of awareness that Christianity and lots of religions have this idea of like the afterlife, the truth is it doesn't get talked about very often. And we found that for a whole lot of believers, their vision of heaven is a big drag, right? It's actually something very vague and mysterious. It probably is something that they really don't want to enjoy, the idea of like some eternal church service in the sky. And yet that's not really what we read about. The topic we're going to go into is what do we actually get from Christ, from the scriptures, about what comes next. What comes next after we cross over, and also what's in the future, the physical, tangible future. For one thing, we had a session on the resurrection, and we made this emphasis, like, this is not a ghostly resurrection. This isn't the afterlife in the sense of being a spirit, with an angel wings and a harp and something. This is about in the body. This is about being in the flesh, in the future, and having the things that attend to that. It's food, it's drink, it's love, it's touch, it's all those things. That's what Christ's promised us. Not just some vague, like, well, at least it's better than hell. But I think for a whole lot of people, just this topic is one that gets passed by, skipped over. Everyone figures that you know it. But the truth is it's very rarely talked about. And most of the images that get passed down, sort of implied, are not actually on Scripture. So that's why we do this topic. So we bring up this topic now of like, what does it mean when Christ says, at the renewal of all things? And I believe that this was a huge eye-opener for me, something I had never really thought about. And the truth is it was a giant necessary comfort in a time just recently where we had a great loss. So when we look at the church, I want us to be able to think about heaven, about, broadly speaking, what comes next for us. And I hope you enjoy this video.